Yeah, I think it's time to start. My session today is about going hybrid with Exchange 2016 and Office 365. A bit about me to begin with, for those of you who don't know me and didn't see my session yesterday. My name is Peter Schmidt. I'm a consultant and infrastructure architect working with EG in Denmark. We are a full-service IT provider in Denmark. I'm working in the Microsoft infrastructure department. We have offices here in Norway as well. My expertise areas are around Exchange, Office 365, Skype for Business, and the surrounding technologies such as ADFS, Azure AD, and more towards the Azure services like the Azure multi-factor authentication services as well. I'm a Microsoft MVP, has been MVP now for about 8 years, previously known as Exchange MVP, now it's called Office Server and Services MVPs. I'm also a certified master on Exchange. I've been through the Microsoft Master Program on Exchange 2007, 2010, and was about to go before they closed it down in 2013. I'm heavily active in the Microsoft communities. Besides these speaking engagements, I'm a founder of a user group with focus on Office 365, Exchange, Skype for Business in Denmark as well. If you have any questions coming up after this session, you feel free to contact me on the contact info below in the slide deck. Let's head on to the agenda of this session. So I'll start off with why we go towards Exchange hybrid, what we need to have set in place before we start looking into the hybrid journey. We'll look further into the hybrid configuration wizard, which is the tool that help us set everything up in our Exchange environment. I'll look a bit into best practices in Exchange and hybrid, and just briefly cover something about the public folders, both on-prem and online. And I'll have a look into how we migrate from on-prem to the cloud, both using the hybrid configuration wizard and the tools we have in Exchange, but also briefly covering what third-party options we might have as well. There's room for questions in the end, so save your questions and we'll should be time for them in the end. So why Exchange hybrid? Well, there are two main reasons. One of them is around our users. If we are going hybrid with Exchange, it can give our users a more seamless experience and a unified global address list. It doesn't matter if we have users already moved to Office 365 and still users on-prem, they're still looking in the same content in their global address list, no matter where they are located. So it definitely gives the users a better experience in that point. Users are also they're using calendars a lot. So when we move them to the cloud, it would not be a success if we kind of break that experience for them. So with hybrid, we are keeping that seamless experience for the users, and we're doing that with federation to Exchange Online. In the messaging context, when a user is trying to write an email, Exchange and Outlook is intelligent and often tells the users that they are about to send an email outside the organization because it's not located inside in the GAL anymore. We're not getting that experience when using hybrid because, as mentioned before, we have a unified GAL. We're syncing all our objects from the on-prem to the Exchange Online. So it doesn't matter if the users in Outlook have their mailbox online or on-prem. They're getting the same experience when trying to check users against the global address list. The other area where we are seeing benefits using hybrid is around mail migrations. With hybrid, we can initiate native mailbox moves from our on-prem environment to Office 365. So, in regards to hybrid, we have other options going to Office 365 though. The first option would be what Microsoft is calling cutover migration. These options, or this option is available in Office 365, in Exchange Online, where in the migration module we have the option to do a cutover migration to Office 365. With cutover, it means that it's contacting either an older Exchange environment to Outlook Anywhere, or it's contacting a mail environment besides Exchange using IMAP, and it's doing a cutover, so it's moving everything at once. And all our users are located only in the cloud, only in Office 365, so we will be using cloud identities to log on to the mailboxes afterwards. It's fairly simple to do this, and it's easy, but it might not give the users the best experience if you already have Exchange and AD and all that set up in your on-prem to begin with. Then we have something in between cutover and hybrid called stage migration. Stage is more intelligent. It's also initiated from Office 365 in Exchange Online. Here we'll be able to do not just a cutover, but we'll actually be able to work with batches. So we can take users, like 20 or 50 users at a time, in small bunches. We still don't need any directory sync or any connections from the on-prem environment when doing stage migrations. We can also base this on cloud identities. If we are doing any of the cutover or the stage migration, then we are breaking the existing user's Outlook experience. So if the user is using offline files, or so they're able to take their cache in Outlook with them, we are kind of breaking that using stage migration. So they have to resync everything from their new mailbox in Office 365 again. If we are going towards hybrid, it's a different scenario. In regards to the cache profile in Outlook, going hybrid, Exchange maintains the mailbox GUID on the mailbox. So even though we move that mailbox to Exchange Online, the GUID is still intact, and the GUID is what Outlook refers to when it maintains the offline files and the cache files for the mailbox. So the cache for the user is maintained in Outlook. They don't have to resync the whole mailbox, even though their mailbox has been moved to Outlook. Outlook is also intelligent, using auto-discover, so it can automatically redirect from the on-prem and connect to the online environment when we do the hybrid setup. Hybrid has some pre-requirements though. We need to have directory synchronization in place. I'll get further into that later. We need to plan something about identity management. We need to make sure that the objects we sync into Office 365 is ready for our mailboxes. And then we need to do the configuration on the Exchange part. And all the Exchange configuration is primarily handled by the Exchange configuration wizard. Using hybrid is fully flexible for the IT admin then, because we can choose to just move one mailbox at a time, or we can choose to move people in batches, like in stage, like taking 20 or 50 mailboxes at a time. When moving mailboxes in hybrid mode, it's like moving a mailbox from one database to another database. Another option we actually get with hybrid is also the offboarding option. So if you have hybrid running, and actually already all your mailboxes might be in Office 365, and for some reason you decide that is not the way you want to go, you want to move everything back, hybrid is the only option you have to actually offboard all your mailboxes back into the on-prem environment. And in the end, it's also the best option to give the users the most seamless and rich experience. So if we take that as an overview here, we have the user experience where the authentication and everything around the users is handled in hybrid mode. We know that federation and all that is in place. We'll also have an integrated admin experience, which means that when you as an admin log into the admin console on Exchange 2013-16 on-prem, you actually have the Exchange Online as an extra menu in the admin console. So you can easily switch between those two to manage your mailboxes, even though some might be online and some might still be on-prem. As I mentioned before, when we want to move mailboxes to hybrid, it's based on native moves. So it's like when we do online move of mailboxes between databases, the users don't feel that we are about to move their mailbox to the cloud. It's just when we kind of do the cutover in the migration move that the user in Outlook is told that they need to shut down Outlook and start Outlook back up, and then their mailbox is actually moved to Office 365. With native mailbox moves, we rely on the mailbox, the MRX proxy in Exchange. So we need to make sure that the MRX proxy is enabled on the cache servers that are internet facing, because that is what Office 365 will be contacting when it tries to move mailboxes from the on-prem to Office 365. With hybrid, the configuration wizard will also establish connectors between our on-prem and the online environment to ensure that all mail communication is secured and encrypted between your on-prem and the tenant you have in Office 365. So if we take a look at the topology and the architecture of this and what's actually needed here. We have an on-prem environment. In this example, it's our Contoso data center. What we need in place to begin with is the AD Connect, the DearSync server. We'll need that to synchronize our mail-enabled objects from the on-prem to the Office 365. And to the Office 365, it will actually end up in Azure AD, because under Office 365, Office 365 heavily relies on Azure AD. So that's where your objects will end up. We also have the option of using ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services. If we implement this, then we are giving the user another option of authenticating before they are logging on to the cloud services. I'll get back to that later. And then we have the Exchange environment. So we have an existing Exchange environment. It doesn't matter if it's 2010, 2013, 2016. And we are establishing a hybrid connection to the Exchange Online environment. If we have edge servers, mail communication will be between EUP, Exchange Online Protection, which will be in front of the Exchange Online, and your edge server. So in regards to ADFS, do we really need that? It really depends, but ADFS can give us some additional benefits though, depending on your needs. It can give the users a more true and seamless single sign-on experience to the Office 365 services. You also get other options with ADFS. You are able to actually restrict access to some services. You're able to use some of the restrictions you already have in AD. Maybe you want to ensure users can only log on during business hours, something like that. If you want to block users, you know it can happen immediately when you block them in your AD, because with ADFS, users are authenticated on the ADFS servers in your local AD before they log on to the mailboxes or whatever services you are using in Office 365. It might also be needed if you want to use any multi-factor authentication services that you already have in the on-prem environment. You could also have needs that require something like the Microsoft FIM services, the Forefront Identity Manager. Could be if you have more multiple forests or something that you want to connect, then you need that tool in place to handle that before communicating with Office 365. And FIM would then replace AD Connect in those scenarios. A high-level look at what we actually communicate with in Office 365 and how it works. We have the Azure AD Connect server, which handles all our dearsync to Office 365. And then when Exchange is established and we have a hybrid configuration in place, it handles the mail flow using the connectors that has been set up on-prem and in the online. And we can handle the mailbox moves. So when we initiate a mailbox move, Office 365 will contact our local environment and move the mailboxes to Office 365. And then we have the federation with calendar sharing. So before you begin the journey to hybrid, like everything else, you need to look into planning, and there are some decisions that you need to make sure is in place. Especially for large organization, there might be extensive planning or even design, putting additional servers in there if the needs are there. But you could already, before you start the configuration wizard, you could do some additional pre-flight checks to make sure that the environment is ready to go hybrid. I'll cover some of them here. To begin with, you need to ensure that the domains you want to use is ready for hybrid. So you need to make sure that you have an Office 365 tenant in place. You need to make sure the domains you have for your mail environment is created in that tenant and set up and validated in Office 365 so you can use them. Then they will be ready when you start the hybrid configuration wizard. You need to ensure how many hybrid configuration servers you'll be using. You could also set up dedicated servers, for instance, for the transport part. But the basic recommendation for Microsoft is use the existing Exchange environment you have, because there's nothing called a hybrid server, as many refers to in some articles, and Microsoft even did that themselves. It's a hybrid configuration, and the hybrid configuration is org-wise. It will be for the whole Exchange environment you're doing. I'll get back to that later. And also with the mail flow, do you have any special requirements in regards to how you want to control the mail flow between your on-prem and the online environment? Could also be some firewall you need to look into in the planning process. So first step is to make sure that we have the identities in place. That's the dearsync part. We need to make sure that we have AD Connect running, and AD Connect is running without any issues. With the AD Connect, we need to make sure that the users has the right UPNs configured. Microsoft has tools also to prep before you start the whole AD Connect process. They have some tools called AD Fix, which can query your AD and see if you have any errors in regards to doing the whole dearsync process before you start it. But you need to make sure that your UPNs on your user objects or the user accounts is not ending on something like .global or .local. The recommendation and best practice is just to use your primary email address, because in the end that will give the best user experience. Then you need to decide on which servers you want to use for mailbox moves and make sure that the MRS proxy is enabled, especially for large exchange organizations which might be located all over the world and might have multiple internet-facing sites. Then you can set up and decide which servers in which regions want to connect to Office 365 and can be used for mailbox moves. Do you have any multi-forest scenarios? With the latest version of AD Connect, we can handle multi-forests. So that could also be a scenario that you need to go in and plan for if you have those requirements. Briefly around authentication in Office 365. When we're talking hybrid and what I've been through so far, we talk about putting the objects we have on-prem into the cloud. The other option, which I also referred to a bit in the cutover, is the cloud identities. When anyone is referring to cloud identities, there's no connection between the on-prem and Office 365. We only have the user accounts in Office 365 then. And they'll typically not match whatever you have on the UPN, or even though you could set it up, but then the user will have 2 accounts and 2 different passwords they need to maintain. So when going with DearSync, we then have 2 options. We can decide if we want to use password synchronization or if we want to go ADFS. If we go with ADFS, it gives the users, as I mentioned earlier, a more seamless log-on to Office 365 services. It will also be more flexible for some of the clients connecting. Another option is the password sync. With password sync, a hash of the password from AD will be synced up to Office 365. So when the users log into Office 365, that hash value will be validated against the Office 365 services and grant them log-on. So, before we start the hybrid configuration wizard, we need to check something in our AD to make sure that we're ready for this. Of course, the wizard here will also go in and do a lot of checks, and it will actually double check a lot of the steps I'll display right now. But these checks are great as sort of pre-flight checks in the planning process to make sure that you're actually ready and the environment is ready. First off, the SSL certificates. You need to check that the SSL certificates you have in your on-prem environment are valid and that they are valid through the process you're planning to migrate. You need to make sure that they are enabled on the services needed by Exchange, and that will be the IIS and the SMTP. If you're running SSL offloading, you need to disable that because that part will not be supported when Office 365 contacts your local on-prem servers. You need to have auto-discover set up for all the domains that you want to use in Office 365. So if auto-discover is not within the SSL certificates that you're using in your on-prem, you can do a bit of workaround on some of them, or you can update the SSL certificates. You need to make sure that the Exchange environment is published so it can be reached from the internet. The most important services here are Auto-Discover and the Exchange Web Services. These are used for free busy calendar sharing, and the Auto-Discover is used for the configuration part of the client. There are also some bits where you need to disable pre-authentication in the local environment. And if you have an environment where you might have firewalls or other intelligent boxes in front of your environment that check for flood or DDoS attacks or something like that, you need to make sure that they kind of restrict access or allow access from Office 365 IPs. Because when starting the whole migration process, there'll be a lot of communication going from Office 365 to your on-prem, because the whole migration process is initiated from Office 365 and pulling the mailboxes from on-prem to the cloud. You also need to make sure that your Exchange servers can communicate without any restrictions, especially towards the Office 365 IP addresses and FQDNs of Office 365. There is a white paper on TechNet describing all these IPs that the Microsoft services are using, and the FQDNs that you need to make sure that you can communicate with. It's not recommended to use any proxy servers in front of your Exchange environment when you start this process. So either stop using them during the migration process, or you have to go in and create rules so the Exchange environment can bypass that. We've seen that can create a lot of problems in this process. Then we have the SMTP. Of course, we need to make sure that we can communicate on TCP port 25, and that Exchange can communicate with the IP ranges of Exchange Online Protection to make sure that we have that mail flow during the whole migration process. A third-party scanning gateway is not recommended in between this. It's recommended that you flip over the mail flow as soon as possible to the Exchange Online to have that maintained, because you have already set up connectors between Exchange Online and your on-prem environment. So if a mailbox does not exist in the online will automatically route that to the on-prem environment. We have some tools that can help us test for some of these things. A lot of you might already know the Remote Connectivity Analyzer from Microsoft, and we can use that to test at least the web services to make sure everything is all set for our hybrid. On the SMTP part, we can use either different tools or some telnet to make sure we can communicate. We can also create a test tenant in Office 365 and create connectors between that on-prem or online environment and our existing on-prem environment, but that would probably only be in cases where we have a really large Exchange environment and want to ensure the testing is all done before we continue with the hybrid process. We have some DNS records that we need to have set up before the hybrid configuration wizard can continue. And that's DNS records in regards to federation. The Microsoft Federation Gateway needs to validate that you own the domains so it can communicate and federate with you. You can do that pre-stage those DNSs. So if you go into the Exchange console in Exchange Online and enable federation, then behind the scenes in Exchange Online, it will generate the value that you need to put in to a text record in DNS. And then you can extract that using PowerShell. So you need to connect using PowerShell to your Exchange Online environment and get that information using the get federated domain proof and put in the domain name you want to have the validation key for. Excuse me. So, the hybrid configuration wizard. If we look into briefly around the history of hybrid and the configuration of it, it came with Exchange 2010 Service Pack 1, and I think the first version we got a really large white paper with about 72 pages, which we had to go through to set all this up. That was enhanced quite a bit with Service Pack 2. I think now we're down to around 80 steps we had to complete, mostly using PowerShell, to make sure all that was set up correctly. Of course, it was quite easy to generate any errors in that process, but still it was a lot easier than the 72 pages. With 2013, Microsoft introduced a hybrid configuration wizard, which was now a web-based UI. It was more of a simplified process, and with the SP1, they extended it, so now it supports multi-organizations in Exchange, and we support the Edge server in the whole configuration process. With the latest update in 2013, it got support for the OAuth. And if we look into how the configuration wizard is now, with CU8 for 2013 and the introduction of Exchange 2016, Microsoft changed the way we get the hybrid configuration wizard. So as before, where it was a web-based UI that came out with the CUs, now it's something that is being downloaded every time we run it. So we start the hybrid configuration wizard within the Exchange admin console of Exchange, and we do that in our on-prem environment. Whenever we run that, a new version of hybrid configuration wizard will be downloaded from Microsoft. And Microsoft is doing that to make sure that they handle whatever errors we run into in the hybrid configuration wizard process better. And it's also easier for them to give us a new version. Actually, I think a new version is published more or less every day, because Microsoft constantly monitors whenever a hybrid configuration wizard is run and it runs into problems within Office 365. Those things are monitored by the Office 365 team, and they constantly put those new fixes into the hybrid configuration wizard. And that's just a benefit for you guys and me working with this. So we don't have to wait like 3 months for a new hybrid configuration wizard. So now that we have sort of a standalone hybrid configuration wizard, well, we can use it in Exchange 2013 and 2016. And with the Agile process from Microsoft, we know it's constantly being updated. We are always running the latest version of the hybrid configuration wizard. Let's see, I've been through some of these. And also, besides fixes, improvements are constantly put into the hybrid configuration wizard as well. And Microsoft is also making sure that by doing this, they know that everyone is running the latest version of the hybrid configuration wizard. No one will be kind of left behind on the hybrid configuration wizard part. So this is just a brief screenshot of how it looks when we started. I'll demo some of that later. Will we be able to run the hybrid configuration wizard in this standalone on 2010 then? Even though Microsoft says that over 50% of all hybrid configurations from on-prem to Exchange Online is still 2010. We'll not be able to run this standalone hybrid configuration wizard on 2010. We can run it on 2013. If we want to upgrade from 2010 to a new version, we need to upgrade our Exchange environment. It's not recommended putting in just one server for sort of a Exchange hybrid running 2016 or 2013 to benefit from the hybrid configuration wizard. Then you need to sort of plan for this like you do when you upgrade your Exchange environment. Because as mentioned earlier, when talking about hybrid, it's not a hybrid server. It's a configuration you do for the whole Exchange environment. And thereby you need to make sure if you want to upgrade, you need to plan ahead and do as you do with Exchange upgrades. Upgrade the whole environment. It's not possible to do any hybrid configuration without the Exchange hybrid configuration wizard. And in regards to URLs that we need or what we need to communicate with when running the hybrid configuration wizard, we need to be able to contact the Office 365 services. As mentioned earlier, Office 365 services has a white paper describing IPs and FQDNs that we need to contact, and we need to be able to do that from the workstation or server in which we are running the hybrid configuration wizard. The hybrid configuration wizard does not need to be run on the Exchange server. It can be run on any workstation as long as it's domain joined with the domain where you have Exchange located in. So if you run the standalone configuration wizard and might already have set up some hybrid configurations, it will go in and update those. So you can always just rerun the hybrid configuration wizard. It doesn't matter. It will update the settings based on whatever you're running through with the hybrid configuration wizard. But even though the existing configuration will be changed. If we take a look at the hybrid configuration engine here then. So step one is that we from the Exchange admin console start the hybrid configuration wizard. And what happens is that we download the latest hybrid configuration engine from Microsoft. When that is being downloaded, it's reading the configuration within AD of our existing Exchange environment. It's then connecting using PowerShell, or remote PowerShell, against our on-prem Exchange and Exchange Online. And then it's pulling the configuration information from Exchange Online and from the Exchange we have on-prem, and it's comparing those to make sure it can configure the hybrid experience so it fits your environment based on the configuration. So now I'll show you how it looks like when we want to start the hybrid configuration wizard here. Should be able to see that up there. Yep. So when I start the hybrid configuration wizard within the Exchange admin console, the first web page I get is this one. I'll log into the web page with my Office 365 credentials, and I'm displayed with this. So the only thing I can do in here is basically download the hybrid configuration wizard. Just extend it here. And as you see, it downloads the hybrid configuration wizard in the latest bits. We go through it here. It goes in and detects my on-prem environment. Should find it here. Yep. This is my on-prem lab server. This is the Exchange Online. You have options here, but basically there's only one option for is Office 365. The other one is if you're using Office 365 in China. You could do some of the configuration manually here, but the configuration wizard will do most of it for you. You have to put in the credentials you want to use for the local configuration of this. Right out of the box, it pulls the configuration or the information I'm logged in with here. I have to log in to my tenant of Office 365. Now it's contacting using the PowerShell. And that was succeeded. Now we are at the step where we want to choose the hybrid domains we want to use for our hybrid environment. In this scenario, I just want to use my Fabricam domain. Oh. Then it's contacting the federated gateway service at Microsoft and pulling the information that we need to put into our text record. This is the pre-stage check that we could already have achieved beforehand, before we go through the hybrid configuration wizard. If we didn't do that, then at this stage we needed to go to our DNS and update this value and eventually wait for it to replicate. So let's have a look at how that looks, just briefly. I should have updated the DNS, so let's have a look. Yep, that fits pretty good. Yes, let's see if it works then. I had some problems with the web application proxy publishing the Exchange environment this morning, so I don't hope I run into that now. But let's verify the domain. So after this has been sort of validated, the next step here in the configuration wizard will be to go through the whole configuration part. So it will check the online and our on-prem, and it will start configuring our client access and our mailbox servers for mail traffic as well. It will configure a receive connector on, I can choose which Exchange server I want to do that on. In this case, I would like to use my 2016 server. And again, the send connector needs to be configured on a 2016. And it's now checking all these certificates to making sure everything is in place here. We need to put in an FQDN in which that would be the FQDN that the Office 365 service would contact the MRS proxy on. So when we start the initiate native mailbox moves from Office 365 and pulling the mailboxes from the on-prem environment, that will be the FQDNs that they contact. So it takes a while for it to complete some of these steps, so I'll not go through all of it, but now it's starting to configure everything, and I'll go back and continue with the slides here. But basically, that's the process we go through with the hybrid configuration wizard after, and it's not like 80 steps or 72 pages that we need to go through anymore, so it's pretty straightforward process here. So, around best practices. Well, when starting to move to mailboxes to Office 365, then the standard limit in concurrent moves of mailboxes is actually set to 20. Microsoft has extended it, so we can actually set it to 300, but it's something that you need to go in and set yourself. Otherwise, it will be limited to 20. So even though you take a bunch of users and say, I'm ready to move these 100 mailboxes to Office 365, it will only do 20 concurrent at a time, unless you go in and you tweak those settings in Office 365. You need to go into the Exchange Admin Center of Office 365, and in the migration menu, you go in and you find the migration endpoints, and you change the concurrent migration settings. And in here with the migration endpoint, that will also be the place in which the hybrid configuration wizard configured the FQDN in which it contacts the local environment. Previously in my demo, I set up mail.fabricam.dk. That would be set up in here. You also need to be aware of when starting the whole directory sync process, and we have downloaded the AD Connect to do that. So when we sync and we have a user, in this example like Ted at contoso.com in on-prem, and when that user has been synced to Office 365, he suddenly shows up as Ted at contoso.onmicrosoft.com. And the reason why that happens is either because the accepted domain has not been added to the Office 365 tenant, or because the UPNs has not been updated in your local environment before doing the DIRSync. So that's also something that you need to be aware of if you have any mismatches in the UPNs in Office 365. In regards to sizing, when talking about hybrid, you should always follow the normal guidelines of Exchange, because even though you get more load onto your Exchange environment when doing the move of the mailboxes to Office 365, you also move mailboxes away from your existing environment. So of course there could be some peak periods, and if you do a lot of mailboxes, you might experience more peak than normal. You could do some of it off hours to compensate for that. If doing it off hours is not enough, the way to do it is put in more Exchange servers to sort of scale out to make sure you can compensate for this. So what happens when we moved all our mailboxes into Office 365? Well, next step would be decommissioning our existing Exchange servers, because we wouldn't need those anymore. So what we can do, though, is keep Exchange and hybrid. And we would need Exchange if we still had hybrid data. But we could also remove our Exchange environment and keeping the hybrid. And with the hybrid, we are referring to just leaving behind one Exchange server, which we are using as the hybrid role. Microsoft is, I know, going to the cloud, you want to get rid of all the licenses and the Exchange servers we use on-prem. And that is also possible, because if we go with this option and we moved everything to Office 365, we don't need any Exchange servers hosting mailboxes on-prem. And for this, Microsoft has a hybrid license that we can use for just one Exchange server in our on-prem environment. But by using this license, you also agree to license terms that this license server must not host any mailboxes locally. So it must only be used for client access or SMTP traffic. So basically we'll be using it to connect to the client access server on the on-prem to get our Exchange admin center, and from there we can manage our Exchange online. And that will be the only Exchange server that we'll be left with then. If we want to remove Exchange completely from our environment, we actually also have to remove DIRSync, because then we are breaking things. If you have implemented hybrid, you have to stay on hybrid. Otherwise, you have to delete your DIRSync as well, and if you're deleting DIRSync, you're really breaking the experience for the users. But there are some benefits of keeping one server as a hybrid server, and that's definitely management-wise. Because with DIRSync, you're synchronizing the local objects from your local AD to Office 365. And you still need a place to be able to manage your Exchange attribute and email addresses, and that would be through the hybrid server. Because it's not supported to do any Exchange attribute configurations using or ADSI and other tools like that. So in regards to public folders, it's actually also possible to take our public folders and move those into Office 365 as well. If you're going through the public folder process, it's also quite a huge project which requires a lot of planning. And if you're going that way, I recommend a session I did on NIC last year, just only about public folders and how we migrate those. I know it's available on I think NIC's YouTube channel, so you should be able to find it there. But briefly to cover what options we have when talking public folders and going hybrid and moving our public folders into Office 365. With Office 365, we have to make sure that we move our mailboxes first. That's the recommendations. And then we can keep the public folders on-prem, and that will be the last part that we move into Office 365. And it doesn't matter if we are using legacy public folders like the public folders on Exchange 2010, or if we are using modern public folders, which will be the public folders of 2013 or 2016. If we have moved public folders into the cloud, there are actually coexistence scenarios where the on-prem mailboxes can contact modern public folders in Office 365. But I think for most, it's probably the way that we are going into Office 365 and we'll be migrating those, and it's recommended to take them last in this process. So a brief look in case we had public folders in Office on-prem and we had our mailboxes in online. We have our online mailbox, which is querying our auto discover. It's contacting the local environment and getting a response back to getting our target mailbox. It then gives information back to the users that the public folder information and so on will be located on-prem, and it's using the auto discover to collect that information and getting the information from the local environment. And from the local environment, it then pulls the public folders that it needs. So in regards to migration, when all the hybrid configuration is set up, well, we can use the Exchange Online, the admin center, or we can use the PowerShell, and we can create batches to get ready to move people into Office 365. It's recommended that you do an initial sync to begin with. You can do that to sort of pre-stage the migration. You're not moving any data at this point. It's just doing a sort of a test of a move and then validates to see if everything is okay and giving you a sort of a log file, a report back in case it runs into any errors. So it's definitely beneficial to do that maybe in the first couple of batches. And of course, when you have all this process in place, everything is tested and you're really ready for doing the migration, use PowerShell to do this and create some scripts so you can do this in batches and get people moved into Office 365. So, like everything else, plan ahead and make sure you test this before you start off with an organization with like 500,000 plus mailboxes. Do a pilot and make sure that pilot includes real people, not just the IT department, but you need the feedback from the people actually using Exchange in this process. Because there are changes in Outlook, there are changes the way people need to connect their phones and so on. So with this process of moving everything to Office 365, even though the hybrid configuration wizard makes it seem easy, there are a lot that needs to be communicated to the users. So make sure you have a communication process in place, so you inform and create guides that inform the users what's going to happen and what's going to happen on their devices like iPads, phones, and so on. Because that whole process on the client is not automatically. Clients need to be updated. The only client that does all this itself is the Windows version of Outlook. It is using Auto-Discover and can handle all that process itself. It's different with the devices using ActiveSync and so on. There are a lot of extra resources if you go into all this. Microsoft also offers the fast-track onboarding center. Through the onboarding center, you can also get some assistance from Microsoft, but there is also papers which can be used both for communicating to your users, but also describing the whole process. And then again, when you're ready for it, simple scale up, put more users into the migration process. So when the whole migration is done and you cleaned out your Exchange environment, all we need left is our hybrid Exchange server. And we need that for the management part to make sure that the AD Connect synced objects we have moving from our on-prem to the Office 365, that it will be the place where we maintain the whole Exchange configuration and the Exchange administration of the users and the distributed contacts or the list and the contacts. We still may need any form of SMTP locally though, and that is also something we can use the hybrid server for, because it still has transport and so on configured, it still has connectors configured from the on-prem to Office 365, so there can be a server we can use for SMTP relay from our on-premise environment. That's another benefit of keeping the hybrid server. Still remember that even though we have a hybrid server, it needs to be patched and updated like any other Exchange server. So it's still an Exchange server, just with a hybrid configuration. Another option could be actually taking the hybrid and moving it into Azure. That is a supported option from Microsoft. Not sure if it's the best option cost-wise, but it's still a supported option for those going that way. There are other options going to Office 365 though. We don't have to go the hybrid way. We can use other third-party tools, and those best known would probably be formerly Quest Tools, which is now Dell. They have a lot of migration tools. Binary Tree has some great tools on migration as well. Also offerings where you can take mailboxes from on-prem and moving them into Office 365. Both those two require servers or something to be installed on-prem. Newer offerings has been Migration Wiz and Skykick, which are purely cloud-based offerings where you go to their websites and pay per mailbox you want to move, or if you're moving public folders, you do it per data. And then it will contact your environment more or less the same way the Office 365 contacts your environment as well, and it pulls the data. Some of the benefits of using third-party tools could be moving around the hybrid if that's not appropriate and the way you want to go. It could also be if you're not on a more older Exchange platform and you really want to move up, and the quickest way of moving up would be going to Office 365. These really don't care if you are running even Exchange 2003 or 2007. You can still migrate from those platforms to Office 365 using those tools. So in regards to the hybrid configuration wizard and Exchange, if running Exchange 2010, do we really need to upgrade to 2013 or 2016? Those of you attending my session yesterday about 2016 could see that we don't really have a lot of difference in 2013 and 2016. 2016 is more or less just a major service pack of 2013. So it really depends on how your environment are. And the long answer is if you go through a couple of steps, it might matter for you. But in the end, it comes down to features. There are some newer features which are supported with hybrid in 2013 and 16. And if you require those and need those for your setup, well, that would be the way to go. But you will need to upgrade your Exchange environment. You could not just implement one server running this. That would not be the supported way of doing it, or not, at least not recommended. It is possible, but it's not recommended. In the end, I mentioned the hybrid license. If you go to the link above here, you can pull out a hybrid license key for your Exchange server, and that is the licensee key in which you can use for the hybrid server you want to keep on your local on-prem environment. In regards to firewall ports, FQDNs and so on, which I talked about quite a lot during the session, there is also some reference in here towards that. So let's wrap up. Planning, testing is important. In regards to deploying hybrid, deploying servers, always follow normal Exchange guidance when deploying Exchange servers. In deployment of hybrid, making sure you have the tenant, know what you want to do with identities, DIRSync and all that, and make sure your Exchange environment is ready. And then run the hybrid configuration, since it does most of the configuration for you. And then you will be ready for migration. And I know we're short on time, but now is the time for questions. Like those of you who attended the session yesterday know, I have 2 giveaways. I've got sponsored two books from fellow MVPs, Tony Redmond, Paul Cunningham, and Michael van Hornbeck, who wrote this great book about Exchange administrators who want to go to Office 365. It's a good, dense book. It's an ebook. I got 2 copies for 2 questions. The first question?
What about multi-tenant on-premise exchange?
Say again.
Multi-tenant on-premise exchange.
So in regards to multi-tenant on-premise exchange, what we do there and how we move that to? That's a very good question. It probably depends on the multi-tenant setup, because there has been different guidelines on that in the past from Microsoft. So if you're running hosting mode, I'm not sure if it's just the separation with address books and stuff like that. Okay, if you're using hosting mode, it will probably be a problem, because then you're separating Exchange in a different way, which is not supported in the Exchange environment anymore. If you're using with the address book policies, it should probably be possible, because then basically you're just splitting up address books and doing some transport stuff. So I think that scenario would be supported, but I'm not 100% sure. You need to check up on TechNet. But you can get a book here afterwards. Other questions? There was a question up there. The question goes towards if we are running nodes and of course using AD Connect to get our objects into the Office 365, if we need the hybrid server to manage all this. Basically, I would say yes, because it gives you some benefits in regards to the Exchange attribute configuration. Otherwise, you will be left with only managing that in Office 365, and when doing the DIRSync, some of these things will be locked down in Office 365. So it has to be done on-prem. So yeah, I think it will be a benefit to put a hybrid in. A book for you as well. If there are no more questions, I'll thank you for attending my session. I hope you enjoyed it. You can come up afterwards if you have more questions. So, thanks.